Good afternoon, and thanks so much for joining us today for Environments of Success, where we'll discuss support minority serving institutions attending predominantly white institutions for graduate school. A 2011 report by the National Research Council posited that the transition of baccalaureate graduates into advanced post-secondary degree programs at top research universities is extremely important, as these students will contribute to research and leadership, particularly in science and engineering initiatives. As such, U.S. colleges and universities must take the appropriate steps to bolster the retention of underrepresented minorities and create supportive environments where these students can persist. Unfortunately, scholars have identified a number of reasons: negative racial experiences, lack of structural diversity, and negative stereotypes about their abilities and qualifications as factors that lead to underrepresented student attrition in graduate programs, which leads us to our conversation and the topic of our conversation today, which is how do we create these environments of success for minority-serving institution graduates, most of which are underrepresented minorities, pursuing graduate degrees at predominantly white institutions. Before we get started, first and foremost, my name is Brittany Brown. I am a doctoral candidate in the Department of Youth Development and Ag Education at Purdue University and an affiliate for the Center for Minority Serving Institutions. And it is an honor and a privilege to moderate this conversation today. I'd also like to take a point of personal privilege to say that I have read work all of these scholars, and it is extremely exciting to be sitting across from the virtual table from them to have this discussion today. So first we'll introduce our panelists. Our first is Andrew Arroyo. Andrew is an associate professor of interdisciplinary studies and the faculty liaison for living learning communities at Norfolk State University. Before entering the academy, Andrew spent 13 years as an innovator and activist in the for-profit and non-profit sectors. His research interests are minority-serving institutions, student success in terms of theory and practice, and transformative pedagogy. So thank you, Andrew, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Dina C. Maramba. Dina is an associate professor of student affairs administration and Asian American studies at the State University of New York at Binghamton. Her research focuses on equity, diversity, and social justice issues within the context of higher education. Her interests include how educational institutions, namely minority-serving institutions and PWIs, and campus climate influence access and success among underrepresented students, underserved, and first-generation college students. Thanks so much, Dina, for joining us today. Our next panelist, oh, there's Dina. Our next panelist is Levon Esters. Levon is an associate professor of agricultural life science education in the Department of Youth Development and Agricultural Education at Purdue University. His interests include the STEM career development of underrepresented minorities, as well as the mentoring and human capacity development of women and URMs in science, technology, engineering, agriculture, and math, what we call STEAM. I'd also be remiss not to mention that Dr. Esters is my graduate advisor and an awesome, awesome mentor. Last but certainly not least, our final panelist is Mary Beth Gasman. Mary Beth is the director of the Penn Center for Minority Serving Institutions and a professor of higher education in the Graduate School of Education at the University of Pennsylvania. Her areas of expertise include the history of American higher education, historically black colleges and universities, minority-serving institutions, African-American leadership, and fundraising and philanthropy. So thank all of you guys for agreeing to be on our panel today. So without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get started. And also, I want to make sure that those who are joining us via Google+, please present your questions, and we will definitely answer some of those toward the end of the conversation. So don't forget to send us those questions. But my first question, I'm going to assume that a lot of people who are joining here today probably understand the importance of creating environments of success for minority serving institution graduates. But there may be a few folks who are new to this issue. And so if someone can just begin our discussion and talk a little bit about the transition that occurs and some of the difficulties that MSI graduates face as they transition from their undergraduate MSI university to a predominantly white institution, and why is important that we create these environments of success.
All right. Well, I appreciate being on this discussion today. This is something that I really am interested in. So, in terms of your question, I think there are 7 quick points I just want to share with you all, the audience, about the difficulties that MSI graduates experience as they transition. And I think one is this lack of inclusion, or this notion of their inability, if you will, to be fully integrated into the campus culture. That's number one. A second issue that MSI graduates face is this notion of understanding of the graduate school culture and the experience or the lack of an understanding of the graduate school culture, and not having had some of the experience that will allow them to really understand and succeed at an R1. A third item I would like to mention is this lack of supportive environments. And so many times students from MSI, especially those that come from HBCUs, they're used to a culture, a very supportive culture at their respective HBCUs. And so when they come to the Purdue's, Penn State's, or University of Michigan's, that same culture is not in place. And so that's a transitional issue that they deal with. Another thing that students from MSIs face is this notion of the lack of access to social networks. Social networks being a community of individuals that look like themselves or that have some shared or similar experiences. Also, I think one last thing I'll mention is this notion of first generation status. Now, of course, you have students that may be the first to go to undergraduate school, pursue an undergraduate degree, but I think there's another level, another layer to this, and that is when students get that first degree, when they go to graduate school, they are then, again, have a status that status of themselves, or their status that they hold, is also one which maybe they don't have experiences or individuals in their family that they can look to who themselves have been to graduate school. So I think all these things collectively are posed as difficult elements for students who try to transition.
Thank you so much. Do we have anyone else who wants to jump in on that question?
I would like to say something, Brittany. This is Mary Beth, and I think, adding to what Levon said, I think those are the ideas that he put forth are really, really important. And sometimes we, especially I think whites, kind of don't necessarily take those seriously enough, and sometimes faculty at majority institutions don't take those issues seriously enough. But in addition to those issues, I would even say that, I've had students who are, being away from family. A lot of MSI students are very close to their family, and being away from family and not having those support systems can be really hard, especially when you might be facing some microaggressions, which, most students at majority institutions are going to face some kind of microaggressions, racial microaggressions. I would also say that sometimes students from MSIs who tend to be low income will, and Levon touched on this as well, the class differences can be very difficult. I know at my own institution, the University of Pennsylvania, it's a private, very elite Ivy League institution. The class can be daunting, and so it's very that's an issue that students deal with. They're dealing with their racial identity and being in a different racial mix of people, but also those class issues can be really they can be very challenging.
Thanks, Mary Beth. I think both of you offered some awesome reasons. I hope that is really set the context for the folks who may or may not be aware of some of those issues. But I think something that both of you said was a great segue into this next question that's actually for Andrew. Levon, you mentioned the lack of a supportive environment, and then Mary Beth touched on racial identity and class differences. And so, Andrew, I'd like to ask you a question about, well, a publication that I have read time and time and time again, which I think will segue nicely. So in your article with Mary Beth, an HBCU-based educational approach for Black college student success, you outline a model that can be used by other universities, namely PWIs, to enhance success of African American students. And I want to pause here just to give a brief overview of that model. The model is the first of its kind. It's an institution-focused, non-Eurocentric theoretical framework that is based on relevant empirical research about the success that HBCUs have had with African American students. A couple of the key components include that supportive environment that LaVon just mentioned, and is the foundation of the model. Also touches on institutional accessibility and affordability, which touches on what Mary Beth just said. HBCUs enroll students from on the continuum, both ends of the continuum, in terms of finances and in terms of academia, and so this model also touches on that as well. There are also a couple of iterative processes that are very important, including achievement, identity formation, which Mary Beth just talked about, and values cultivation. So we could probably have a whole discussion about that paper alone, but for those who haven't read it, I encourage you to go and do that. It is a beautifully written piece of academic work, so that's really awesome, Andrew and Mary Beth. But Andrew, can you talk about how this model might be modified for graduate students? Because there are some differences in students who are matriculating in an undergrad capacity and as opposed to those in a graduate capacity.
Well, thank you for that, by the way. There are differences, of course, in the level of rigor. For example, just the level of rigor alone that students go through when they're at the graduate level. But there are still aspects to that model that are transferable to predominantly white institutions. For example, we could look at that identity component of the model. You know, we are all, when we're in our own home, at our own address, none of us are minorities. None of us are marginalized in our own homes. It's only once we walk outside the front door that we might become marginalized, that we might become minorities. And for non-white students at a predominantly white campus, if they walk onto that campus and they don't see their identity reflected on that campus, that can contribute to a feeling of exclusion. And so there's two applications that I could think of a lot of them, but there's two. One has to do with the physical campus. The other day I was walking on the campus of a predominantly white institution, and they had a quad of residence halls, and the residence halls were named Scotland Hall, Ireland Hall, England Hall, and there was one other European country. And as I was walking this quad, I was thinking to myself, what if there was a Vietnam Hall? Why can't there be a Ghana Hall? And so you can see right there that students that are non-white, non-European are going to have this sense that, oh, my identity is not even represented on the physical campus. And then another area where we could help our graduate students to feel more integrated would be in the curriculum. Faculty control the curriculum, and faculty can ask themselves, am I teaching about this particular population as a topic, as an object in someone else's story, or am I teaching from a centered place where they are the authors, where they are the agents? Nobody wants to be a topic. Nobody wants to be somebody else's object. And so we could do those, if we just did those two things, paid attention to the physical campus environment and paid attention to our curriculum, I think our non-white students at PWIs would have a much easier time seeing themselves and excelling in that campus.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. You guys are making this so easy for me. I'm able to segue into the next question so easily. But that was perfect. You talked about marginalization and how students may walk to these campuses and they don't see people or things that they can identify with, which leads to a feeling of marginalization. And so that leads right into my next question for Dina. Dina, you wrote an article with Robert Terry Palmer called Creating Conditions of Mattering to Enhance Persistence for Black Men at a Historically Black University. And you use Schlossberg's 1989 concept of marginality and mattering to examine conditions important fostering retention and persistence among Black males at HBCUs. So first, can you talk a little bit about what you found in your study? And then also, can you talk about how some of those concepts of marginality and mattering might be used at PWI so that these MSI graduates feel like they matter?
Sure. So briefly, the study that my colleague Robert Palmer and I conducted involved interviewing student affairs practitioners. And these student affairs practitioners worked in tandem with faculty to identify and develop interventions for students, especially for those who were academically not doing well. So among our findings included what we called authentic caring, and the other was engagement matters. So what we meant by authentic caring was that it was important that faculty, staff, administrators demonstrate this authentic concern for students. And that's by actively engaging in dialogue, listening to their concerns, and getting to know them as individuals through being familiar with their goals and interests. So really, kind of forming genuine mentoring relationships with them, and listening and displaying concern for their college experiences in general. So the key then is really to create these conditions of mattering for students by demonstrating their engagement in and outside of the classroom. We also found that engagement matters. The type of engagement matters. In other words, in and out of the classroom engagement is especially important. It meant that student involvement within the classroom and student-faculty interaction was critical. Feeling like students actually mattered. So in addition, there was this emphasis for faculty to be able to use the classroom as a safe space for being able to facilitate this student learning and retention. So the key also is to look at classrooms as a space for being able to facilitate learning and in turn, have better persistence rates or retention rates. Students were more likely to feel a sense of belonging and mattering if they perceive faculty as genuinely interested in connecting with them during class and also valuing their perspectives that they bring to the setting.
Okay. Thank you, Dina. Again, I said that you guys are making this so easy for me because you're creating a segue to the next question for me. So first and foremost, thank you. And again, I want to comment on your paper as well. I read it for the first time a few weeks ago. Again, another awesome paper that I will continue to draw upon. And as a doctoral student, it's always awesome to learn about new theories and new frameworks. And so thank you for that. So Levon, it seems like what some of Dina was talking about refers to something that we call in mentoring as like psychosocial support. And so mentoring has been cited as an important factor in the persistence of URMs, particularly in graduate environments. And it's also been found that it's been significantly and positively related to student persistence and graduation for students in STEM. And oftentimes, people get the terms mentoring and advising a little bit confused. There's often some gray area there. And so can you first talk a little bit about the differences between mentoring and advising? And then can you talk about some steps that PWIs can take to enhance cross-cultural mentoring?
All right. First of all, I appreciate this question. So to be clear, so the way I look at mentoring, and again, my response is going to be based a lot on my experience. And so when I look at mentoring serving two primary roles, and that is that of a coach and that of an advocate. And the advocate, meaning, for those who may not be aware, is someone who gives public support for that student. And so I use you as an example. Whenever I'm in a venue, whether it be on campus or otherwise, I make it a point to brag, if you will, on my students. And that whole notion of being an advocate and being a coach. Now, the difference between mentoring and advising, the way I look at an advisor throughout my schooling is especially at the graduate school level, is a person in an advising role primarily serves in the role of just one who disseminates information. And it's a less formal interaction. And so there's not that there seems to be a lack of a caring attitude or caring approach with that student. And so those are two differences primarily between that of a mentor and that of an advisor. Now, in terms of, so the two pillars that must always be present within this mentoring relationship, and that focuses on this notion of the psychosocial component, which is the caring, the empathy, being a friend or friendship, if you will, and the instrumental component, which involves connecting the student with networks, giving career, job advice, those sorts of things. And a high quality mentoring relationship should have those two components present in order for that student to thrive and do well. And so, in your second part of your question, can you repeat that again?
Question is, and I know that we've done this in the College of Agriculture at Purdue, so can you talk about some steps that PWIs can take to enhance cross-cultural mentoring? Because oftentimes MSI graduates like myself, we walk onto a PWI campus and we really don't see a whole lot of folks that look like us. I've been very fortunate to have an advisor who looks like me, but that's not always the case. And so how can PWIs do a better job to enhance that cross-cultural mentoring so that both mentors and especially mentors, especially advisors, can kind of transition from that advisor to that mentor role and provide these students, these MSI graduates, with the support that they need?
So that's an excellent question. There are three things in particular that a PWI institution should do. Number one is there needs to be a very clear and authentic commitment to, beginning at the highest levels of university administration, to this notion of ensuring that graduate students, especially students of color, succeed. That's number one, without a doubt. Number two, there needs to be some education. I would like to tend to call it education versus training. I just think when you try to educate individuals, there's a more deliberate effort behind educating versus just putting on a seminar or a workshop via training. So, for example, the MAP program, the Mentoring at Purdue program, we had a session where we focused on this notion of what is cross-cultural mentoring, excuse me. And then we're having a second, so not only focus on cross-gender, race, and ethnicity, but also what does it mean to have to mentor a student who's maybe from the LGBT community? So I think it's important. And then the third thing that I think needs to happen, and I don't think we're always mindful of this, I think we need to be careful about developing metrics on achieving diversity goals, because what it can do, it can quickly turn into a numbers and percentages game, and then we're just counting how many. And so I think clearly, without a doubt, in my experience, the degree to which you can really get that buy-in and that upper-level administration, university administration, to be committed to helping enhance or helping establish a culture of mentoring within a graduate school, that's number one. And number two, provide very clear and consistent education to faculty. I think those are some mechanisms, if you will, that will help enhance the mentoring within the graduate student population at any respective university.
Yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for talking about some of the things that we have definitely tried to discuss, particularly in our College of Agriculture at Purdue, and I think I can say that we've definitely made some progress there, and so I'm excited that we've been doing that and hoping that other PWIs are doing the same. One of our final questions for Mary Beth, actually. Recently, the Center released a guide to graduate school for students at minority-serving institutions. And can you talk a little bit about why a resource like this is particularly important for students at MSIs? And what would you say is different about MSI graduates that make a guide like this necessary?
Thanks, Brittany. Well, I think one of the reasons why we wanted to release this guide is, number one, we're trying to provide as many tools as possible for all the different parts of MSIs, right? Students, faculty, staff, professors, a whole variety of different people involved in MSIs, because we want to provide, it's really important to provide free resources, we think, to people. The more information, the better decisions you can make. So this guide was written by students of color, which I think is really, really important, who are in graduate school at a majority institution and really understand what some of the issues are that that students might face. And so I think it's important because it's written by students of color who have similar experiences. I think that it speaks to specific issues a little bit more closely. And so, as an example, if I were at an MSI and I wanted to apply to graduate school and I had been in an environment that I liked and that was nurturing and that helped me to feel empowered, I would want to go to a majority institution for graduate. If I went to a majority institution for graduate school, it would be one that had a larger percentage of students of color. It would be one that had a plentiful array of faculty of color, which that is very hard to find at many majority institutions, depending on your field. And then I would also want to be at an institution that had a lot of programs and services. And so those are all things that we try to get people to think about in making their choice for graduate school. I also want students to realize that they have a voice and they get to use that voice, right? Today I was talking to one of my staff members who happened to go to an MSI for undergrad and is thinking about getting a doctoral degree. And one of the things that I said to her was, it is very, very important that you do what you want to do and that you don't acquiesce to the ideas of others, that you don't let a professor take your voice away, right? That is incredibly important, but that's not necessarily the norm at a lot of institutions, especially in graduate school. Oftentimes, faculty want to reproduce themselves. And so another thing that we put in the book is, how to avoid getting into situations like that. And I also think there are a lot of really standard things in there, such as I'm sorry about that, such as how to apply, getting letters of reference, how to write your personal statement, and there are lots of common mistakes that students make in those areas, and some of that has to do with social capital and not having a mentor to tell them how to do it. I mean, I was one of those students who didn't really have a mentor to tell me how to do that. A lot of it has to do with not kind of having maybe parents who went to graduate school. I didn't have parents who went to graduate school. I didn't even really understand what graduate school was. So we take into account that you may not have the same social capital, that you may come from a low-income family. Not that all MSI students do, but a large percentage do. So we try to take into account all those things. I think a lot of guides to graduate school just see graduate students as all being the same kind of student, and what we did is we really tried to see students as being having multiple identities and being very, very diverse. So for me, that's why the guide is important, and it's free. So and it guides you through how to apply.
Well, I will say I definitely enjoyed reading the guide, even as a graduate student. Some of it is quite comical. I think there's a line actually. Oh, where is it? It talked about. There's no such thing as a true holiday vacation. I thought that was quite hilarious and very true. I think Levon ensures that my vacations are full of reminders that I have things to do. So I really just appreciate the authenticity of it because it's very honest. It definitely speaks to what both graduate student, master's, and doctoral students, what is expected of them. I definitely love the section on you are a colleague, not a student, because that is very true. I think oftentimes all students, I'm sure, but students from MSIs, if you're not in that research environment, you're not really certain. You may think going to get a doctoral degree is an extension of the undergraduate process, which is just totally false. You're expected to be a colleague and be on time and be responsive and to join networks and do all of those things as a colleague would. And so I love the guide. I appreciate it. I have encouraged all of those who are thinking about going to graduate school to download this guide, because I think it is real, it's authentic, and really gives a really clear picture of what the graduate school process is like. So thank you to you and your team for producing this, because this is really, really great. So another question I have is for students like me, students who are fully immersed in coursework, and we're learning how to write grants, right? And we're working on our academic writing, which is different from normal writing, and we are involved in all of these initiatives and really immersed in our research. And so, and then on top of that, we often find ourselves kind of at the bottom of the departmental food chain. But we see these issues, particularly for those of us who are MSI graduates. And so anyone can grab this question, because I am the moderator, might just get to pick someone out. But as faculty members and as advocates who have dedicated your lives to doing this work, can you provide graduate students with some insight on how we can best contribute to creating these environments of success? I think that, you know, the research shows that the doctoral process in particular can be very isolating. And so how do we kind of get ourselves outside of that bubble and really advocate and create these environments of success, not only for the students, but to get us in front of the right people so that our administrators know that this is important?
Brittany, can I take the first punch at that?
Yes, you absolutely can.
I'll be really quick. I think, you know, one thing that graduate students can do for each other in order to create really positive environments is that they cannot compete with each other. You know, I mean, competing and comparing yourself to other people does nothing but set you up for failure. And it ends up being a really hurtful environment for students. And faculty can do their very best to not engender competition among students. You know, one of the things I think is incredibly important is getting people to work in teams. That guide that was written here, it was written by a team of people. Everybody gets their name on things, and everybody is held up as doing really, really good work. And so I think not competing with each other, not tearing each other down. The academy tends to be a place that fosters that kind of negative behavior, and that's really, really unfortunate. But I think that trying as faculty or staff, trying to make sure students don't do that, and as students, making sure that you don't do that and that you uplift your fellow students rather than just comparing yourself to them and tearing them down. I think that's what makes a really wonderful environment, and these are going to be your future colleagues. These are going to be people who you're going to be out in the field with, so you should treat them well, and hopefully they will treat you well too. So that right there is really important to me.
Thank you, Mary Beth. Do we have anyone else who would like to jump in on that question? Andrew or Dina or Levon?
If I may, I'd like to jump in. First of all, I agree 100% with Mary Beth's comments, but I also want to offer up something, and I would love to hear perspectives of Andrew or Dina, or Mary Beth for that matter. And that is, I think one of the things as I thought about this question is I think it begins first with a critical mass of students who support each other and who are successful academically and professionally. And so I use my own context. So in my graduate program at Purdue, there will be potentially this coming fall 5 students of color, 5 African American students within my research group. To have 5 students, that's a critical mass out of 20 students. And to have these students, Brittany, who's included in that group, to work with 4 other students who look like her, who she can talk to, exchange stories with, you name it, that I can't stress how significant that is. And so when we always talk about critical mass does not mean half my department needs to, half the graduate student population needs to be URM. But in this case, 5 students, that's critical mass. Now, it may differ from chemistry, it may differ for ed studies, it may be different for physics. But I do think, at least in my context, which I work, having 5 students of color working together and to see the success that you all have had these last few years and the types of jobs you're going to be getting when you graduate, that to me speaks to university administration, college administrations, department administration, and it adds value to the culture within that department. So I think clearly, for me at least, it begins with a critical mass. And then my second point is this. I do think these same students can serve as advocates for the department in their recruitment efforts, because if you have 5 students of color who are successful, when we do have other students who are interested, I don't have to say much of anything because I have 5 students who are successful, who have track records, who are going to get good jobs, and it just feeds a cycle. So to know when I started 6 years ago at Purdue, we had, I don't know, maybe 1 student of color, to now we have 5, that to me is significant. So I would just stop there and just offer that up.
Thank you.
Do you want to go? Oh, okay, sure. Well, I've got actually a couple of thoughts on this. The first one, before I directly answer your question, I just want to, if I can, just go back to this idea of institutions, because as important as it is that we focus on what students can do, so much of the research and the practice over the past several decades has been focused on students. And so if students aren't succeeding or if they are struggling, we tend to adopt a deficit-minded interpretation of that, saying there must be something wrong with the student rather than diagnosing the institution. Right. And I think our PWIs need to be better at self-diagnosis. I had this one example, this was at the undergraduate level, but I had a Filipina student who was accepted into the premier public institution in my state, and she transferred from that institution to my HBCU, which technically, you know, people view it as a more access-oriented institution. What she said to me was that it wasn't that she lacked the skills to succeed at the PWI, it's that she felt like they had these special offices designed to help her. You know, she felt like a topic, she felt like an object, she felt like the institution was making a project out of her, as opposed to actually taking her and seeing her as a student. And so institutions can really, as important as it is to have diversity offices and diversity officers and those types of things, I hope that PWIs can move beyond that to have a much more inclusive fabric ethos. As far as the students, I agree with what's been said so far, with them working together. That's critical. Cooperative environment that the students can form no matter what the hostile environment might be at the PWI. And then the last thing I would say for students is to make sure that they're producing excellent work. I have to tell you, and this is a principle that applies to white students, to students of color, the number of people in academia who are not producing excellent work, who turn in incomplete references sections, who leave punctuation errors, and who say that they're part of a team is way too common. And so anybody, no matter their color, who simply formats a reference properly and includes proper punctuation in their sentences and meets deadlines, they're going to be set apart, and they're going to find that their professors are going to want to work with them, I think.
I really like that. Thank you so much, Andrew. I want to elaborate on it, but I want to give Dina a chance to respond to the question.
You know, as I was thinking about this question more, what kept standing out to me was oftentimes we put the onus on the student to try to make these changes, right? And it just kept coming back to, you know, we really need to think about the role that student affairs and faculty and administrators have in this facilitation, being able to facilitate a community that they can actually sort of get together, as Mary Beth was talking about, collaborating, having these sort of support groups to be able to succeed together. But I think one of the things that I would also add to this is that for graduate students is to know that you have a voice, and that voice can and will be heard through being able to find allies and advocates within the institution, right? So this is where the roles of having supportive faculty and student affairs staff come in. So it's really sort of this things that it has to work in conjunction with each other and together at the same time, instead of sort of having the students always taking the initiative.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dina, for your. I just wanted to touch on, Andrew, I love what you said about producing excellent work, regardless of, your race, your gender, your orientation. I know for myself as an MSI graduate, we already know that there may be some negative stereotypes exist the second that we walk on campus. And so for me as a graduate student, it's extremely important to produce good work, to encourage others to produce good work, and kind of to the best extent possible, whatever may be going on around you, continue to make your standard excellence, because that oftentimes will get rid of some of the naysayers, because good work can't be disputed. And so I know that's what Levon constantly preaches to us when he works with us. Always have an attitude of excellence, and so I really like that. And I also appreciate from Andrew and from Dina that that you're encouraging that students and Mary Beth as well, that students have a voice, and your voice deserves to be heard. It will be heard. And so for all of those students who might be listening, I know that I'm definitely going to take my cue from that. I am fortunate enough to have an advisor who encourages me to use my voice. But I encourage, all students, whether they be MSI or not MSI, to really use your voice to make your graduate process your own. Mary Beth just said a lot of times advisors and mentors, they just kind of want to reproduce us into the same thing that they are. And sometimes that's not all bad, but you also want to make your graduate process your own, and know that whenever you leave there, you want to leave something better than you found it. And so I definitely encourage all graduate students who are listening to use your voice, because you're creating a path and setting the stage for other MSI graduates who'll be coming behind you. So I definitely encourage that as well. I have another question, and Dina, you're already up on the screen, so I'm going to put you on the hook for the first response to this one. What do you believe is the single most important first step that PWIs can take to begin to create environments of success for MSI graduates? Thank you. I'm taking notes here as I'm listening as well. Levon, do you have any insight on the single most important first step?
Yes, and I think, and I've thought about this as well, and to me, having been in the academy for 10 years now, I think the single most important step is the tone starts, and or vice provost, excuse me, the president or the provost. It's been my experience that if those two individuals are not are not setting the tone for the university. Even though you may have a vice president or vice provost for diversity and inclusion, that person's voice doesn't matter very much. And I've been in conferences where there's been a collection of vice provosts for diversity and inclusions, and they tell me the same. Just solely on my experience, I will say without a doubt. And if I look at the examples at University of Maryland, Baltimore County, Penn State when I was there, at Iowa State, the president or provost at those institutions, it all started with them. And it then trickled down to the other administrators, to the college level, and to the department. So again, what I would offer up for the group and for those listening today is that if the president or provost does not set the tone as it relates to the culture that should exist for graduate students of color, especially those that come from MSIs, then I think all of our efforts are going to be met with some resistance. So that's what I would offer up.
Thank you. Andrew or Mary Beth?
Andrew, would you like to go first?
Well, okay. I would echo what Levon just said, because I was going to say pretty much the exact same thing. I think there's a continuum. Let's say that you have an institution and they don't have any sort of vice provost for inclusion and diversity. They don't have any kind of office. Maybe their first step is to create one, but then they cannot stop there. It's almost one of those positions or one of those offices that as soon as you create it, you need to start asking, okay, what do we need to do to dismantle it? Because if you stop there, then what you've essentially done is you've created scaffolding for a building, and then you're trying to build this building, but who leaves the scaffolding after the building is erected? So we have, in my mind's eye, when I think in terms of metaphors, I see all these predominantly white institutions across America that are like beautiful skyscrapers being built, and they're surrounded with scaffolding, and everybody's content. They say, oh, we have an office here, we have an officer over here. No, what we need to do is then ask ourselves, okay, what do we need to do to dismantle this scaffolding so that inclusion, equity, diversity is fully institutionalized? And that's a tough question to ask and to answer.
Yeah, I totally agree. Very tough question. Mary Beth, you want to take a shot at this last one?
Sure. So I think the single most important thing that predominantly white institutions can do for themselves, for students, for basically kind of the betterment of society, and especially for if they're interested in recruiting MSI students or students of color into their graduate programs, is that they can change the curriculum. I think that the curriculum at most institutions is outdated. It is too focused on European ideas. I think that Western ideas are privileged in ways that are not fair to other people. I also think that the way that the classes are taught is not appropriate. I think that faculty tend to teach in ways that makes them, that are convenient to them, that are easy for them, and that they're more comfortable with. And I think they should push themselves to teach in ways that give their students more skills, that help their students learn more, and that ensure really good outcomes. And one of the best ways that they can get better at doing this is by looking at the work at MSIs. And you know, most of you guys know that I wrote this book that just came out, Educating a Diverse Nation, with Cliff Conrad, and what we did is we looked at the curriculum at 12 minority-serving institutions for examples about how we can empower students of color throughout all of our colleges and universities. And I think there's so much to be learned at minority-serving institutions because they are experts at educating students of color, and I wish that majority institutions would sit back and listen and take some of those ideas in and then, you know, implement them within majority settings. I think that's really important. I think all too often faculty think that they know everything and that there's nothing left to learn. And I think that is a big fallacy, and you know, you got to sit back and realize that sometimes other people can teach you things, including your students, which is, you know, I learn more from my students than anyone. So that's what I think would be the big one.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all four of you for those really, really awesome responses. I really like the thread of conversation about PWIs learning from MSIs. And some of the work that I've done with Dr. Esters, we always work really, really, really hard to ensure that when you're partnering with MSIs, you have to make them feel like they're a true partner. You know, not one of those partners that we need on a grant because we need a diverse group of folks to work with us. And so having that true, authentic partnership and really making MSIs feel like a true partner, and really recognizing that PWIs do some things really well, but MSIs do some really awesome things as well. And so really partnering with authenticity, being genuine in those partnerships, and recognizing that learning is a two-way street, I think is really, really awesome. So I want to give you guys an opportunity if you want to have any last words. If not, I will close out with thank yous, but I'll give you an opportunity to do that. Andrew, Dina, Levon, Mary Beth, do any of you have any last or final thoughts?
I would just offer, first of all, my thanks for this forum. I think it's going to be very useful to a lot of people. It's been useful to me. And I want to echo what Mary Beth said, and this brings things kind of back to full circle. It really, the curriculum is so important. And so faculty, because faculty members do control the curriculum, it is critical that each faculty member takes time to dismantle and to interrogate exactly what it is they are teaching, how they are teaching it, both in terms of the mechanics, the pedagogy, but then also the content. And we must make sure that at all of our institutions, our students see themselves as agents as opposed to objects. And that's what I want for myself, so I think I should want it for my students as well.
Absolutely.
So.
Thanks, Andrew. Levon, Mary Beth?
Yeah, I think one of the things I would like to leave the audience with today is, you know, it goes back to a comment I made earlier about recruiting students from MSIs to PWIs. I think all too often PWIs are interested in the numbers game, as I mentioned earlier. You know, how can we increase the number of African Americans? How can we increase the number of females? Or how can we increase the number of Latina? That's good, but I think there's too much of a focus on numbers. And I think, and this approach, Brittany, as you know, that we've taken with our MAP program, is there needs to be this notion of it's bigger. You need to go into a recruitment activity, if you will, with some intention, but that intention needs to be very sincere. And once these students are on campus, you need to put in mechanisms or put mechanisms in place that will ensure their success. I mean, there's no other way. I didn't recruit 5 students of color just so I can have 5 students. I recruited students that, actually I didn't recruit students. People heard of some of the good work I was doing. They were able to talk to other students. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, I think success breeds success. And so I hope for the listeners out there, understand that if you are at a PWI, there's some way you can communicate to the administration that this notion of diversity is good, but we should think bigger than a numbers game. And then even more importantly, my last point is, I think inclusion is even more important than diversity, because when you feel inclusive, when you use inclusive approaches, I think at that point you will then truly create an environment that would help students from MSIs in particular be successful.
Awesome, thank you. Mary Beth, any closing comments?
Sure. Well, I think, you know, one of the things I would do, I didn't do this when I was a student because I just didn't know and had little knowledge of graduate school. But one thing I would do is there are a lot more resources out there for people who are interested in going to graduate school. And, you know, I would look for faculty who it looks publicly like they have very good relationships with their students. It looks as if the schools have faculty that embrace students of color. It looks like look for faculty who are giving opportunities to students of color, who are co-authoring with them, who are engaging them in co-presenting, who are, you know, empowering students of color. So if you don't see, if you're applying to a majority institution and the person who is most aligned with you in your field of study doesn't have evidence of empowering students of color, I would not go there, no matter what. I would go somewhere where there is evidence of individuals, of faculty members empowering students of color. I would gravitate toward those people because I think they have a track record, they understand things better, and they're going to take better care of you. And, you know, I think it's incredibly important for faculty to take care of all of their students, but it's you know, it's really important for students of color, especially students of color from low-income families, but even students of color in general who are probably going to experience things differently because of the way that you know, racism and a variety of other factors operate in society.
Thank you, Mary. I'll close with just a couple of final comments. And first and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much to all of our panelists. You guys have offered some amazing insight, some insight that I hope will be shared with PWI administrators, faculty, and students. I encourage all of those who are tuning in today, encourage your friends. If they missed it, go check this conversation out using our YouTube link with the hashtag MSI Success. This is an extremely important conversation, one that is certainly near and dear to me as a student who is an MSI graduate and now matriculating at a PWI. And so share this conversation, share the things that you have learned today. And a couple final thank yous, not only to our panelists, but also to Lola at the Center for Minority Serving Institutions, who's the Assistant Director for Programming. She's been working really, really hard behind the scenes to make all of this possible. Thank you to the center for all of the awesome, amazing work that you guys are doing on behalf of MSI and MSI students. And then to all of those who tuned in to us today, thank you so much for joining in. I hope you learned something interesting that you'll be willing to share with others. So thank you, everyone, for joining, and have a great afternoon. Goodbye.